Billionaire financier Jeffrey Epstein pleaded not guilty to a two-count indictment charging him with molesting dozens of underage girls, and we're not going to go into the salacious details of this stuff. What is interesting about this case is it comes 11 years after a 2008 plea deal, which gave him a slap on the wrist for the very same kinds of activities dating back to at least 2002 or 2003. And I want to talk about what's changed. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, I think Charles Lipson at the U.S. edition of The Spectator summed this up best. And I just want to read this to you. In 2008, the prosecution negotiated the plea deal while it kept victims in the dark. The underage girls Epstein exploited were not notified in advance about the agreement or allowed to object. A federal judge recently ruled that the case was mishandled and the victims should have been heard. And almost immediately, the indictments came out on Saturday. He was arrested on Sunday, and this not guilty plea came up on Monday. Bill, what do you think's changed since 2008?
Well, he got caught. Uh, Here's the thing about Epstein reminds me very much about Harvey Weinstein, and also about Kevin Spacey and Bill Clinton, for that matter, all of this stuff. And what happens here is you see a person who's got a great deal of power or money or both committing these egregious crimes and sins for 20 years. And then people all around him know this is going on. No one does anything. Occasionally somebody will come out of the, I don't want to say out of the woodwork because that's impugning the victims. It's not what I mean to say, come out of the shadows, let's say, to make an allegation. And needless to say, you're a billionaire or whatever. It's just simply swept under the rug or whatever the case may be. And then either the timing is right or the age is changing, which is hopeful, or sometimes you just get lucky. But one of these charges sticks enough to make a blip on the public consciousness, and then all of the other victims of that person suddenly come forward, and it's like the table tilts and everything starts happening. And the most repugnant part about all of this, to me, is how the rich and powerful friends of these evil people suddenly just become shocked and morally outraged at such an unbelievable thing from a friend that they had simply no idea that this kind of thing was going on. The rumors about Harvey Weinstein, and not just rumors, stories, evidence, all this has been floating around Hollywood for 25 years or something like that. Same thing with Bill Cosby, by the way. Bill Cosby's exploits had been pretty much well known in Hollywood for 15, 20 years. But Bill Cosby is Bill Cosby. He's America's daddy. He's a very wealthy guy, you know. And so you almost need to have enough. Steve, what it's like to me, I think, is this. Probably best way to imagine it is this. Think of celebrity or money or political power or all three as kind of like a hurdle that has to be cleared. And it's a pretty high hurdle. And so you have to have an event that's dramatic enough, which means either a witness that's dramatic enough or credible enough to clear that first hurdle. But once that hurdle is cleared, the hurdle basically gets knocked over, and then anybody who's got a story can walk through, and and again, I don't mean that in a dismissive way.
Yeah, yeah.
But then people who've also been victimized by this start coming out, and then the next thing you know, you've got this legion of victims, and everybody's wandering around looking at people like, how did this possibly happen? When everybody knows full well how it happened. Everybody knows full well how it happened. Everybody knew what Harvey Weinstein was. Most people knew who Bill Cosby was. A lot of people knew about Harvey Weinstein, all the rest of it. And so this is the issue. And I think probably the better point is that this kind of thing. Remember when the Harvey Weinstein thing broke, right? And it was like, oh my God, the mighty have fallen, and everybody's trying to get away from him and so on. Okay, his career's ruined, appropriately enough. He should be in jail. So Kevin Spacey, same thing. But my takeaway from this, Steve, is that as we record this right this second, there are other rich, powerful, famous people doing these kind of things secure in the fact that they've been able to brush this stuff under the rug before by either paying hush money or calling their friends at the New York Times or doing whatever they have to do. And right now, there are victims of powerful people who have been committing these serial crimes for decades, who are waiting for their moment now when somebody is with enough credibility or the timing or the evidence or whatever to knock that initial hurdle down and let the flood of victims basically come in. And by the way, this is what we saw with Bill Clinton, but what we did not see with Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump had a Stormy Daniels case, but that wasn't followed by 25 different women claiming that, that Donald Trump had assaulted them, as had been the case with Bill Clinton. So it's long overdue, and my feeling on this, very sincerely, is yes, Epstein needs to go a very deep hole for the rest of his life. But so do all of the people that knew that this happened. And my final thought, just as it comes to me, is I'm reminded of the Penn State scandal in this regard, where it may have been, oh my gosh, what's his name? The coach.
Sandusky?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sandusky may have been doing the crime, but if Pa Joe knows about it and other people know about it, or to the very least have heard rumors about it and don't act on it, and they're in positions of authority, then they're complicit as well. They're not complicit to the same degree as being participants, but they are complicit to the degree where they had a responsibility to know, and basically forfeited that responsibility. And just since I mentioned this, that means, yes, I think Joe Paterno should have resigned, obviously, and so on. But this business of taking away every single record that Penn State won while he was a coach is just insane moral virtue signaling and ridiculous. Punish the guy, punish the person, but this kind of, we're gonna ban all of Harvey Weinstein's movies because of this. It's like, please.
Yeah, no. Pulp Fiction is still a great film. I don't care what a sick bastard
Absolutely
Harvey Weinstein is. Scott, I want to go back to Charles Lipson here in just a sec, although I think it was Dave Burge on Twitter, and I forgot to write this down, so hopefully I'll get it right, who said, it's always the billionaire pedophile with an airplane nicknamed the Lolita Express that you least expect. Anyway, Charles Lipson wrote, one thing is certain about the new charges. They will not proceed quietly through the courts away from inquiring eyes. Not this time, anyway.
Not this time.
This time, they are front-page news. The DOJ has already devoted serious attention to them, and they won't be interested in a backroom deal. The press, this would be a nice change, will be interested too. The more big names and juicy details, the better. Is this you think it's a very clever case of, for once, using celebrity against itself to deliver some justice?
Hadn't thought of it that way. First, I want to give a hat tip and praise to Miami Herald reporter Julie Brown, who put in several years of work on this story when people told her, hey, give it up, it's over, the case has been settled, there's no use pursuing this. But she managed to get a hold of some heavily redacted documents that gave her enough information to begin tracking down the alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And even though the prosecutor in this case, the new case, has used repeatedly the term allegations and alleged victims and alleged behavior, this is a guy who already had a deal struck. This is a guy who already spent time in jail for some of these kinds of charges. This is a guy who had to register as a sex offender as part of that previous deal. And so I don't think we need to we don't need to walk on eggshells and use the term allegations in this case. At the very least, we know that he was engaged in some of this behavior, and he's acknowledged as much. That said, I don't think that the previous prosecution and attempt to prosecute him absolves him. It's not a double jeopardy situation. It's a kind of a subtle point of law, but when you're prosecuted and convicted of something or make a deal at the state level, you can still be vulnerable to federal charges. Those are two different jurisdictions, and it's not considered to be double jeopardy. To you can criticize the prosecutors at the time for making the deal with Epstein, but I think they probably made the kind of calculation that everybody makes in a case like this. What's the most we can get? Prosecutors are by their nature pretty tenacious, and they want to make a name for themselves. And taking down a pedophile billionaire would certainly ensure your reelection for the rest of your life, or as long as you wanted it to. So the prosecutors usually don't make a deal if they think they can nail you on the charge. These kinds of cases are extraordinarily hard to prosecute. It's very difficult to get young victims, especially, to testify or to testify credibly. They're always afraid there is an imbalance of power there. And I'll tell you, this kind of situation gives credence to the complaints of the people on the left that there are two systems of justice in this country.
Absolutely.
If you picture an inner city poor black guy who was charged with sexual acts with 14-year-olds, for example, and with paying teenagers and young girls for sex or sex acts and recruiting others and doing basically sex trafficking, where would that guy be right now? In jail for the rest of his life without a chance of parole. And the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was able to walk has to do with money and power and influence and cowardice on the part of our government and its prosecutors. And I think that needs to be said right up front. Now, this time, Steve, like you said, the veil is down. These guys no longer have the protection of quiet deals behind the scenes. And every victim out there knows what kind of deal was struck this time and will be loud because of what Bill was talking about. Once that dam breaks, once you got some people coming forward, then there will be more people coming forward. I celebrate the possibility that justice may be done in this case. I think Epstein needs to go away for a long, long time. But more than that, I think we need to be much more attuned to the influence of money and power and political contributions and just the courting and cultivating of celebrities around you. Every celebrity who has a wealthy friend, who is not himself also a wealthy celebrity, needs to treat every new contact as a potential threat. And I don't mean that to say that we always have to say, well, I don't trust anybody around me. But when some guy says, hey, why don't you come hop on my plane and we'll take a ride over to France and I'll show you around the town for a little bit, you immediately ought to be suspect. This isn't just the circles that you're now worthy of traveling in. This is a potential threat to your reputation and a risk to your very freedom.
Wow, that is
Steve,
a
I need to add one thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
When Scott was saying that this validates what some people on the left are saying about two standards of justice, I agree with that.
Absolutely.
But I think something important needs to be said here, and I hadn't thought about this earlier. Harvey Weinstein and Epstein, Kevin Spacey, Bill Cosby, all of them are Democrats. And this is important. It's not because Democrats are worse people than Republicans are. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is when your news media is so biased so that it is going to protect Democrats like Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, both of whom have allegedly been to this island, right? This is the result of the media not going after everybody. It's the job of the news media. I'm not saying the news media should leave Donald Trump alone. On the contrary, what I'm saying is the news media should be aggressively going after any kind of wrongdoing. And the reason that Epstein was able to get away with this for so long was because he knew that he's a big Democratic donor, big friend of the Clintons, and had the cover that comes from the ring of invisibility when you know that the news media is on your side and can be persuaded that what you've actually done is a net good for the cause. And there's not, this to some significant degree, a very significant degree, all of the victims of Bill Cosby, all the victims of Harvey Weinstein, victims of Kevin Spacey, victims of Epstein can be laid at the door of journalists who certainly should have known, if they didn't know, what everybody else around these people knew was widely known, that these people are predators, and they didn't act on them, or their stories were spiked because they're prominent Democrats or liberals or whatever you want to put that label on. This is what happens when the news only works one way.
Yeah, it's you got to go after all the bastards, even the bastards that are supposedly on our team. I want to go back to Charles Lipson here for just a sec. He asked, why did it take so long? I mean, these charges date back to, I think, 2002. This awful plea agreement is 11 years old. He says the likely answer is that Epstein has lots of rich and powerful friends. Surprise. As we say in Chicago, he knows a guy who knows a guy. He must have known lots of guys. They were passengers on his planes and visitors at his estates. And that is perhaps the most damning thing of all. I'll tell you who maybe ought to be the most nervous out of this. And I'm not talking about Epstein, because I think his fate is pretty much sealed at this point. But the person who I think should be losing a little sleep right now is Clinton. And I don't mean Bill Clinton, even though he's the guy who took those flights with Epstein to Pedo Island. I'm talking about Hillary Clinton. Because if something has changed at the Department of Justice in the last couple of years, where somebody as rich and powerful and influential as Epstein can be brought up on charges dating back almost 20 years, then surely we can go after somebody as rich and powerful and influential as Hillary Clinton for criminal acts she committed as Secretary of State much more recently than that. And that is your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.